It started several years ago, me and my friend's interest in urban exploration. I was a junior in high school at the time, which was when everyone started to earn a lot more freedom, so we took the chance to be out late whenever we could. Now, keep in mind that I live in a major city in central Colorado, so the nightlife is never lacking. We could always find something to do, and were especially drawn if there was an element of danger. We wouldn't always plan these trips, but we made sure as hell that if we were going into any building in the dark, we would have a knife and a flashlight for safety. We never really had to defend ourselves, but we came very close one evening. It must have been around November, because there wasn't yet snow on the ground, but it was a very chilly evening. Directly across the street from the abandoned hospital, which we hypothesized is still around from the tuberculosis era, is a hospital that is newer and in use. The two are connected by an underground tunnel, which I can only assume was a way to move bodies without alerting the patients. This is a common feature among old hospitals. We had been inside the hospital a few times, but never found anything strange, only the occasional signs of others having been or lived there. What was piquing our interest that night was the abandoned library next door to that hospital. It was connected, but only by exterior walls. To get inside, you could not cut through the hospital, but instead had to hop over a tall wall and climb a very high fence. A few of us had backpacks containing the aforementioned safety precautions and a couple of bottles of water, so nothing too heavy or valuable that would get damaged when tossed over the obstacles before us. A little ways off the road, it was dark if you clung to the buildings. We did for a while before stepping behind a small patch of shrubbery, which we determined was an easy way over the first wall, since the only other way to gain access was by a chained, unclimbable gate at the bottom of a set of steps facing away from the ledge. Both were parallel with the library, so when tucked back in that corner behind the bushes, no one could see us from the street. I don't believe I went first, but I did not remain behind to be last over that wall. It was too high up for me to jump and haul myself over, so I resorted to stepping on a pipe jutting out somewhere lower along the wall. It gave me a bit of a needed boost, and soon I was up and over, moving into the library's courtyard. Another girl and I waited for our two other girlfriends to join us. Upon an initial glance over the courtyard, there was no obvious way in. To our right was a dilapidated fountain, which I took joy in imagining spring forward a spray of water from its detailed stonework in the brighter summer months, people laughing and talking with the surrounding trees bringing them shade. Now, however, it had been in long disuse, and the earth at our feet was cold and hard. There were no signs of another soul for years, save the 15-foot chain-link fence directly in front of us separating the courtyard in half. I could tell it hadn't seen the same weather as the rest of the courtyard because the metal showed no signs of rust. That must be our way in, we agreed, because with a fence like that, someone obviously wanted to keep us out. We hurled our bags over the fence, hearing them clank on the ground rather silently due to their lightness. I was the third over because I have a slight fear of climbing, and it took me a bit to mentally prepare myself. I made it to the top of the fence in short time, then sat at the top straddling it with a leg on either side. I had two girls on the other side in front of me and one behind me who was telling me to hurry up. I spent a good couple of minutes up there doing another mental preparation and some deep breathing, then climbed down to wait for the last girl. At the time, I was thinking that had been one of the scariest things I've done in a while, because I tend to avoid climbing at all costs. Of course, this is an irrational fear, as I have never fallen, but that phobic fear didn't even compare to what happened next. The last girl's feet hit the ground, and all four of us split up in the smaller half of the courtyard, looking for any kind of entrance. We decided that breaking a window would be too loud and draw unwanted attention, not to mention we could get really cut up. So that wasn't an option. Searching for a little longer, we didn't find anything that looked remotely plausible, until we found a grate near the base of where two walls met. I couldn't believe we hadn't noticed it before, and upon closer inspection the grate was already moved slightly from its resting place, so it would be easy to lift the rest of the way. The smallest and least fearful of our group went first. After moving the grate, there was a small drop down. It was no more than 3 feet down and 2 feet wide, but inside there was another drop down where we could see into the library basement. She hopped down into the small square landing, only to almost immediately freeze. We looked amongst ourselves, wondering what was wrong. "There's a guy down there," she said. "What? Where?" "I can see his outline." I leaned forward and tried to make out a shape, but it was further down than my line of sight permitted and too dark. "Hello?" she called out. He responded the same, asking who we were. "Just a couple of chicks," she spat out bluntly. What he said next sent chills down my spine, and it was as if I could feel the darkness radiating out of that hole in the ground. All of a sudden it was very still and quiet, like that darkness had spilled out and weighed all of us down in that gloomy courtyard. He said in what I can only describe as a lustful tone dripping with ill intent, "I'm addicted to following the sound of women's voices." My friend looked over at us blankly, but there was nervousness underneath, unease. Something in his voice sounded like it wasn't an empty threat, like he wasn't just saying something creepy to get us to leave. She looked back to where he was and said lowly, "That's not cool." The man under that dark earth began laughing maniacally, and not in the kind of way a really good actor does, and the way that we could feel his utter insanity hit us like stale air. We looked at each other for what felt like hours in that gloomy courtyard, but I knew it was only a couple of seconds, because we all exchanged without even speaking that we had to get out of there. And now, I was not about to risk some nutcase coming after us, even if we did outnumber him. The friends scrambled up out of the landing, and I was never over a fence faster in my life. 15-foot potential fall, and I didn't even have time to think about it. We didn't stop running until we were on the street and halfway down the block out of breath. I can still hear that maniacal laugh. Back in the 80s, me and my friend Don used to explore the woods near our homes. One time we discovered an old trailer someone had dumped in the middle of nowhere. Oddly enough, there was no road, no tire tracks, and no way of it getting there. The rotted out wheels were still attached to the underside, and there were no cinder blocks holding up the rest of it, as is common, so the rest of the weight was being supported by the front edge, which had warped downwards from the strain. We curiously approached the trailer and walked along its length to see if there was anything of note on the other side. Curious and finding the entire situation bizarre, I walked back around to the front and tried the handle. It was unlocked. I opened the door and peered inside. To our surprise, the entire trailer was furnished. There was an armchair, a couch, curtains, an old wooden TV set with a tiny screen, tables, chairs, paintings, and even curtains and throw rugs. But while everything was still laid out as if though someone lived there, all the furnishings had succumbed to years of neglect and unchecked humidity. Everything was covered with a light dusting of mold, and the stench of rotting vegetation was strong. Don joined me and surveyed the interior. We began to examine the furniture and interior at great length. Everything looked like it was from the 40s. All of the photos hanging on the walls, what few we could still make out, were black and white shots of people in old-style dress. The automobiles in the backgrounds of several photos were all circa 1930s to 1950s. We both touched the furniture next. I put my hand on the couch. Don touched the armchair and quickly withdrew with disgust. They were damp and slimy. We soon realized that everything in the trailer was damp and was coated in some kind of viscous oil or slime. We stopped touching things at that point. As I made my way into the kitchen, something crunched under my shoe. I looked down to find the skeleton of a rabbit beneath my foot. I called Donnie over and showed him the bones. They were still articulated for the most part, held together with dried sinew. Donnie suggested it had gotten in and died of starvation. I continued over to the old refrigerator. Instead of a handle, it had a latch that you had to lift up to open the door. I pried it up and quickly withdrew my hand, as the handle was also covered with the slime, and I looked with disgust at it before wiping it onto my jeans. Then the smell hit me, and I looked up into the long dead appliance. The inside of the refrigerator was packed with more skeletons of various animals. It looked as if someone had just jammed dozens of remains into the refrigerator and freezer sections, and they had all jumbled together into a mass of dried ribs, skulls, and leg bones. When Don saw it, he started to swear and wanted to leave. Who the hell would put dozens of skeletons into a refrigerator in a trailer in the middle of nowhere? I made light of the situation to ease the tension. As I looked longer into the mess of tangled bone, I glanced over at the oven. I could see through the crusted oven window the now familiar bits of yellowed animal bones. I grabbed the oven handle and opened the door to another tangled mess of bone and flesh. I called over to Don, who had retreated to the living room. He looked over and began losing it, saying he was done with this. As he started backing away towards the front door, I opened a cabinet and more skeletons tumbled out. These were loose and weren't packed in like the refrigerator and oven. At this point, Don had left the trailer and was outside yelling for me to join him. I glanced down the hallway towards the bedrooms. I asked Don what he thought might be down the hallway. He said he didn't care and wanted to leave right now. I told him I was going to take a look. Despite him swearing at me and threatening to leave me there, I started down the darkened hallway to the bedrooms. There was a bedroom directly behind the kitchen, and I confidently opened the door. It was difficult to see in this room. Unlike the living room area in the kitchen, there was only one small window, and the light was further obscured by desiccated curtains that hung damply from the cheap rods. As my eyes adjusted, I found the room to be largely empty aside from a scattering of a few more skeletons and torn bits of old newspaper on the aged yellow linoleum. Not bothering to enter the room, I walked further down the hall despite Donnie's continued protests. I slowed as I neared the bathroom in the back bedroom. The air was thick and repugnant with decay and mold. I took a deep breath of cleaner air and then slid open the bathroom door, a very cheap thin plank of wood on rollers. The bathroom was barely visible in the gloom, but it stunk of rot. I could only barely see the toilet and tub shower combination, but they appeared empty. I slid the door shut again to contain the smell and took another breath of cleaner air near the first bedroom before heading back in to see whatever lay behind the door in that last bedroom. I reached the door and noticed that no light came from beneath the crack at the bottom. I grasped the knob, even though it was coated with the same gunk that lined every surface of the trailer, and tried to open the door. The knob turned easily enough, but something seemed to be pressed against the door from the other side. I pushed harder, and I could hear a damp, cracking sound as whatever was holding the door shut slowly gave way. Still, the door didn't open. I was determined though, so I put my shoulder to the cheap wood and shoved. Slowly, the door opened up, but I had to fight it every single inch. I soon saw the reason. The entire floor was covered in animal skeletons about a foot thick. There was not a single inch of the floor space that didn't have that strange, tangled mass of animal remains. Things were much more damp in this area, and the corpses seemed to grow into the walls. The bones were larger too. The animals in this room were larger. Dogs, it looked like, and deer in addition to the rabbits, raccoons, and others. The only area clear of bodies was the arc where I had forced the door open. Unlike the previous bedroom, this room was furnished with a bed and a dresser, but both has long succumbed to decay. The bed frame had survived, but the mattress, or what was left of it, was nothing but an uneven mass of various molds and fungi. The dresser has collapsed in on itself and also had various mushrooms sprouting from its legs and exposed shelving. The massive bones seemed to pour out from beneath the bed in a flood of decomposition, while a surprisingly luxuriant black mold had spread upwards to engulf the black wall, then across the ceiling toward the one window. I discovered the air was completely unbreathable and staggered backwards towards the kitchen, choking on the spores. No doubt to Don's relief, I headed back outside to get out of the putrid air. I leaned on the side of the trailer, coughing and choking for several minutes. As I was slowly able to breathe again, the implications of what I had just seen began to pique my curiosity once more. The skeletons were piled up against the door, so how exactly did the skeletons get there in the first place? The window? I walked along the span of the trailer to the window of that back bedroom. I could still smell the stinging reek of the mold in my nose. The window was shut, but the glass was shattered. Someone must have been forcing animal carcasses through the window. Don asked what I'd seen, and I told him. He didn't like my revelation one bit and just wanted to leave as quickly as possible. So we went home. Months later, I tried to find the trailer again, but either couldn't remember where it was or someone had removed it. Whatever happened to that trailer of bones, I'll never know. I was raised in the city of Atlanta. There is lots to explore and we find more places every day. Much of what we find is outside of the metro area. We use Google Earth looking for abandoned shacks, buildings, and other things. Then we go explore. So yesterday we found a little home that looked completely torn down and wanted to check it out. So we walked through some woods during the midday and arrive. As usual, we knock and yell, announcing that we are here and aren't robbers or cops. We have stumbled upon people robbing copper from abandoned houses multiple times, and it's better to let them know you are there than to run into them. Nobody answered, so in we went. We weren't scared. We have done this type of stuff a lot and barely ever come across unusual things. So as we start searching, we notice the floor feels hollow. We peeled back a smelly rug and found a little hatch. No way in hell is this happening, I thought. My brain is freaking out. Part of me has seen enough horror movies to know not to go in. The other half knew this is what any urban explorer would dream of. So I open it. There's a small staircase. It was folded up, kind of like the fold-up ladder people use to get into their attics. The three of us climbed down in. First, there is an old rotten bag of Lay's. There were bugs inside and no chips. Using rubber gloves, I picked them up. Expiration, January 27th, 2014. Somebody was here. It had obviously been a while, though. There are a lot of people who do what we do in Atlanta. Finding new unexplored places is rare. We kept walking around and didn't find much except for a ratty old computer monitor. Then we heard footsteps upstairs. We had no idea what to do. There was frantic kicking on the floor above us, as if somebody was being restrained. Then a muffled voice yelling,
"Come on, man. You know I ain't got nothing else."
And the sound of more muffled wrestling. We scrambled for the window. The room was a basement, but the top of the basement was above ground and had these little mini windows letting light in. I tried to open the first one, but it was jammed. There was dirt outside blocking it. My friend managed to get the second one open. We all ditched our bags and crawled through. We ran like hell, got in the pickup truck we came in, and drove. As we headed home, all I could imagine it being was a drug deal gone wrong. I couldn't help but wonder if we should have tried to help whomever was above us. But getting wrapped up in a qualm between two potentially coked out homeless men was the last thing I wanted to do. I'm big on urban exploration. Looking around man-made structures and sites really interests me. I don't often get the chance to explore big and actually abandoned places. A lot of what I do is sneaking around gravel pits and dams and lots of outdoor sites with sparse infrastructure, so when I find anything actually abandoned and worth the time, I jump on it. This all happened 2 days after Christmas of 2014. My experience scared the living hell out of me. I was out on a very nice winter day getting ready to snoop around a paper mill I had known about since I was probably 12, so nearly 3 years. I had visited twice previously that winter with my mother waiting in the car by the road. As I only planned on scouting these 2 trips, I left early due to the temperature being nearly 0 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chills both times. This time was different though. My mother parked the car a few blocks away at a park, and we walked down to the mill as this week was still cold and snowy, but nice enough to check the place out in full. We took some pictures around the outside of a structurally unsound building which we refused to enter, and I couldn't help thinking I heard footsteps way around the other side of the building, but I blamed it on water sloshing and steam tunnels that I knew existed under this portion of the site. 10 to 15 minutes later, we had finished up by the older building and headed into a large machine hall through a loading dock. At this point, I no longer heard footsteps, but was still wary as the area I heard them coming from was now only some 250 feet away, connected by a courtyard. We worked our way further into the machine hall, and I started setting up for a shot. And here's where things, in my opinion, got downright scary. We heard a loud crash in one of the rooms coming off the courtyard and into the middle of the machine hall. Needless to say, we immediately ran. After running back through the building, we jumped out the loading dock that we had entered and started running across a small overgrown lot to the fence. Once we got out here, I heard 2 yelling voices coming from the loading dock. We ran another 200 feet or so, and upon reaching the fence, we ducked through it. No one came out of the building to our surprise, but we waited behind a pile of wood chips just to be sure. When we thought it was safe, we started back down the road to our car. We set down my tripod for one last picture and noticed a dark blue SUV parked and running right next to a locked gate. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside, however. We took one look at the beautiful setting sun shining through the darkened buildings and left. I thought absolutely nothing of the idling SUV until 3 weeks later we heard about a drug bust going down at that exact paper mill. I'm not sure if that SUV was from the same crew that got busted, but they sure as hell didn't want us there that day. This happened when I was about 12 years old. My friends and I used to ride our bikes all over Hell's Half Acre, and we lived in a neighborhood bordering East Cleveland that got a lot of spillover crime from the ghetto, most of which were high school-age kids in gangs committing senseless crimes. Lots of murders, lots of robberies. I even had one friend whose mother was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was killed by a stray bullet from a drive-by shooting. I guess our town wasn't the best neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst either. So I had saved up my money from birthdays and holidays and saved up enough to buy a new mountain bike, and it was pretty badass, although I believe it was only like $200, but it was the first thing I ever saved my money for and bought for myself. Naturally, I wanted to take it in the woods and rip some trails, but being in an urban environment, all we had nearby were some small patches of woods. A few years prior to this, I ran away from home and got lost for like 4 hours before stopping at a gas station and calling my dad, who was the reason I ran away from home in the first place, to come pick me up. The reason I got lost is because I turned off the road behind the local post office and went through a pretty big lot, the biggest I'd seen in the area, and when I came out, I was not anywhere I recognized. So anyways, I called up my friend who also had a mountain bike, and I told him about the wood lot. We decided to go rip the trails. When we arrived at the post office, the scene was pretty much the same, except they had it fenced off with probably an 8-foot fence and barbed wire. Not the looping razor wire that's impossible to climb that you see in prisons and military compounds, but more of the conventional just keep yourself at distance type of barbed wire. Luckily, there was a small cut in the fence that we could sneak through with the bikes without having to challenge the barbed wire, although our urban exploration had brought us over many barbed wire fences, so we were accustomed to getting over them unscathed, but never with bikes. So we snuck into the woodlot and got on our bikes and headed down the trail, which was on a downhill decline. As we just started to pick up speed, we were not even 50 yards into the lot when we saw ahead of us, probably another 50 feet, a group of 8 to 10 older black kids, all tatted up and not dressed like they were there for a camping trip. Baggy clothes, jeans in the summertime, do-rags, etc. They were just standing there around a fire, smoking cigarettes or something else. We stopped and looked at them for what seemed like only a few seconds, and they seemed to notice us immediately. At first, they started yelling to us to come over to them. Neither of us moved. We were both good kids with good families, and we knew that this was not a situation that we wanted to be in. They began getting more aggressive as we didn't respond, and the
"Hey, come over here,"
turned into,
"I said get the fuck over here."
At this point, my friend and I looked at one another, knowing they wanted to steal our bikes and probably beat us up, hoping one of us had some kind of escape plan, and when we looked back to see what they were doing, we saw two of them running at us. We flipped our bikes around and took off back towards the fence. We were pedaling uphill, so we were going slower than we would have if we were on foot. I was in front, and I jumped off my bike and ran with my bike in tow beside me. My friend followed suit and did the same. We were covering ground faster on foot since we were going uphill and couldn't gain any momentum on the bikes. We get to the top of the hill, and we're greeted by the barbed wire fence. Fuck. Now, I was a pretty strong 12-year-old. I was very athletic and had natural strength from growing up as a wrestler. We wasted no time looking for the opening because it was well hidden and a pain in the ass to get through, so I just grabbed my bike and threw it over the fence. My brand new bike. Then I grabbed my friend's bike and did the same. We scaled the barbed wire and jumped down from the top and into the parking lot where our bikes lay to strew, and hurriedly picked them up. Scaling the barbed wire had bought us some time because the two guys behind us were holding the fence open for each other, and one guy got his shirt snagged. We took off as fast as we could, and now we were on smooth pavement and a flat landscape. There's no way we were getting caught by someone on foot. We sped off a mile or so down the road and stopped at the gas station, scared shitless and gasping for breath. We looked back and saw nobody. We had escaped, or so we thought. As we sat there in the parking lot of the gas station recapping what had just taken place, we were getting ready to ride away when our worst nightmare unfolded. An old body-style Grand Marquis pulled up, and in it were 4 of the 8 guys. I'm not certain where the others were, but 2 of them were unmistakably the guys chasing us in the woods, and the others were probably down in the woods, but I didn't recognize them. My relief of escape turned to terror as the car pulled in and one of the guys jumped out.
"Hey, motherfuckers."
We didn't wait around to hear the rest. We hit skates and were cutting away on our bikes before they could respond, pedaling as fast as our legs would take us. They got in the car and followed us through the neighborhood as we cut through backyards, threw our bikes over fences, cut across streets, and essentially ran for our lives. We eventually found our way into someone's backyard a couple of blocks from my house that lived on a corner and had a large wooden privacy fence, which we hid behind. We could still see through the small cracks between the wooden planks and had a view of the street from 2 different angles. We saw the car pass twice, then nothing. We didn't want to risk coming out quite yet. What if they were waiting up the street, I thought. What if they were waiting down the street? We didn't know what to do. Then the luckiest thing ever happened. The guy whose yard we were hiding in called the police. We saw the flashing lights through the fence post and panicked. We thought we were going to be arrested, but the cops weren't concerned with what we were doing as much as they were concerned about who we were hiding from. We recapped the story, and they gave us rides to our houses. It was over. The cops never did find out who those guys were or what they wanted. I could only imagine that they wanted our bikes or they just wanted to beat us up for fun, or maybe both. I moved out of that area about 3 years later, and my friend I was with stayed. He's currently serving jail time for gang-related crimes. 14 years later, as a 26-year-old, 6 foot, 225-pound guy, I still have frequent nightmares, at least once a month, where I am on foot or on a bike running through my old neighborhood while being chased by gangsters who want to kill me. This was probably the most terrifying experience of my life. The complex corridors of this abandoned asylum were the idea behind its design. It was done to confuse the patients, and if they were confused, they were more likely to stay in their common area rather than exploring the labyrinth of walkways and stairs. It was getting late, and I remember the rain, which was pouring, and the wind was blowing steadily. After a long journey, the asylum finally stood before me. The plan was just to get in, get some shots using specialized lighting, and then get out again. The door was partly open, as if they were awaiting a guest. I thought about this for a while and laughed before entering the grand reception. Any photographer knows that feeling when they have a new canvas to play with, and this was no exception. I started making notes on areas to visit so that I didn't lose time by walking through the entire asylum. I'd been scouting for around 25 minutes when I first heard something. I was walking down a corridor which ran the entire length of the asylum. It was the one place that connected all of the buildings, the meeting place of many complexities. The corridor was sectioned by heavy-duty fire doors. I know a little about this type of door, and it takes a significant amount of effort to move one and approximately 20 seconds to close. When it closes, it makes an unmistakable thud. In an abandoned place, you can hear a pin drop, so when the corridor was filled with that exact thud, I knew I wasn't alone. My mind tried to come up with every logical explanation possible. Pigeons? Nope, they can't move fire doors. An animal? Nope, not them either. Wind, perhaps. There wasn't even a breeze inside this place. Okay, I thought. It must be another person. Maybe a copper thief. Probably. Hopefully. I continued to move, much more delicately than before, mostly looking over my shoulder instead of where I was going. The next thing that happened stopped me dead in my tracks. The heavy footsteps were calm and well-timed. I knew whoever it was already had a minimum of 20 seconds on me, so I decided to do what anyone else would: leave. Taking the left-hand corridor would lead me to the joining corridor, then up the stairs, take a right, and the exit is right there. I moved quickly and quietly, following the directions in my head, and then... Wait, what? Pausing for a breath, heart beating faster, I could hear the sound of footsteps getting quicker, getting louder. The reality hit me hard. My directions were wrong. I hadn't been to this part of the asylum before. My mental map disintegrated and the footsteps were so close they must have been where I was standing just before I decided to make a break for it. Panicking, I burst into a run, abandoning all hope of being silent in my escape. Making the typical horror movie mistake, I took the next door, which happened to be one of several patient cells, and hid myself around the back of the door. With just the sound of my heartbeat exploding in my eardrums, the sound of the footsteps disappeared. At that time, I was hoping to hear a security guard's radio or a calming whistle, anything that would help me figure out what was behind the footsteps. Slowly moving to get more comfortable as I hid, my camera's tripod hit the wall loudly, and in less than a second, the footsteps started again. They were just around the corner. I braced for impact. At least I would get to find out who this was. The collection of horror films I've watched in the past certainly wasn't helping. I listened closely to every single footstep, and whoever this was now standing outside of the door of the cell I was hiding in. With one eye peeking through the door gap, I couldn't see him yet. What was this? They began to walk away again, calm and steady. The corner muted the sound. They must have gone around it. My desire to find out what had been following me wasn't as strong as my desire to stay safe in the cell, so I stayed and listened to the footsteps getting further and further away, followed by the familiar thud as the fire door closed. Then silence. After 30 minutes of silence, I got up and got ready to get out. Striding as fast as my legs would take me back along the corridor, I took a left and quickly realized that this was the left I was supposed to take earlier. Stop. Senses running wild. No noises. No footsteps. Move. Up the stairs, next right, reception. The door was closed. I couldn't remember if it was me who closed it, but I assumed it was. Part of me thought that when I tried to turn the handle, it would be locked, and I would be trapped in here with whoever the footsteps belonged to. I tried to shake the thought. The handle turned, and as I stepped out, I've never been happier to feel the rain on my face. I didn't find out who or what it was that followed me that night. I keep telling myself that it was just another curious explorer. But I'll never know for sure.